a lot of you are doing cooking at home, but shopping is not always an easy chore. So my goal today was to keep everything pretty simple, just include ingredients that you hopefully have in your kitchen or that aren't too hard to get at the market, and keep it simple. When I teach people to cook, my goal is not to just teach you, oh, here's a recipe, here's what you do, but also to show you the techniques that you can take on to other recipes to make them delicious as well. So that's kind of what I'll be doing today. We've just got a few simple recipes, but I'm going to be throwing in some tips and techniques that are going to help you in cooking anything going forward. So let's get started. We're going to start with gluten-free matzo ball soup. So let's start out with making the soup part. A lot of people know how to make a soup. You just throw a bunch of stuff in a pot, you cook it up, and you've got soup. But there are a few techniques that you can learn that are going to make your soup even more beautiful and taste even better. And so we're doing chicken soup today. So what I've got started on the stove is a pot of chicken, water and chicken getting started. So the number one rule when you're making chicken soup is to start with a big pot of cold water. You don't want to start with hot water. You want to start with cold. Just put in your chicken. I've got some chicken wings, a chicken leg, and a thigh. Inexpensive parts are perfect. You don't have to go out and buy a chicken breast to make soup. Keep it inexpensive. Just find whatever is the least expensive and throw it in. Something like I like the wings because they have a lot of bones in them, and the bones are partially what are going to give your soup that richness and flavor. So we started with cold water, chicken parts, and a high flame. I've got it so that the water is just starting to heat up and bubble a little bit. And what you're going to see at the top of your pot, and I'll show you here, if you can see the pot just a little bit, you can see that there's some bits of foam that are bubbling up to the top. And what you want to do as this is going on, and probably for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the soup going, is to scrape out that bit of foam that comes to the top of the liquid. And you're also eventually going to start seeing little brown bits that are floating up to the top, and you want to remove those as well. And this is going to give you a really beautiful, clear broth once it's finished. So I'm scraping out, and I'm going to continue to do that for probably a half an hour, 15 or 20 minutes. But what you want to watch for is throughout the whole process of making this chicken broth is that your water never boils. So once this beginning stage gets the water hot enough that it starts to bubble, I'm going to turn the flame down so that it just keeps simmering, a light bubble. Why do we want it not to boil? Well, if you have ever seen a perfect soup, the broth looks nice and clear. If you let the water boil, all the little pieces of sediment are going to break up into tiny pieces, and they're going to cloud your soup. So this process is going to give you a nice, beautiful broth. So just throw it on the stove. That first half an hour, you have to keep a close eye on it, scrape out all the bits. And then once the foam and the brown bits have pretty much stopped coming to the top, then you can throw in some more flavor. And that includes a half an onion, some parsley, some fresh parsley, and you don't have to chop it, just throw it right in. I've got a couple of sprigs of fresh thyme, some carrot. You can use whatever carrot you've got in your fridge. I had baby carrots, so I threw them in. And then one stalk of celery cut up. And then I also have a couple of bay leaves and some peppercorns. And so again, these go in after you stop scraping all that stuff off the top, put them in and just keep your broth bubbling, gently simmering. You can go as long as 7 or 8 hours. The longer you let it go, the richer it's going to be. The more of that collagen from the bone is going to get into the broth and make it rich and flavorful. If you've just got an hour, it'll still work, but it's just the flavor and the richness won't be quite as much. So I'm just going to let this keep going, and we're going to move on to another part of this recipe. And so that is matzo balls. And so I sent out a list of a lot of the ingredients for each recipe. And forgive me, I forgot the one important thing on the matzo ball ingredients, and that's the matzo meal. And so just, of course, that's part of it. This is specifically a recipe for gluten-free matzo balls. Because gluten-free matzo meal is kind of different from traditional, you need to add a few extra ingredients to get the matzo balls to the right texture so that they hold together. So if you're making them just with regular matzo meal, best to follow the instructions on that package, not this gluten-free one.
Hey, Chef,
yes.
did you want me to share the recipe now or whenever you want? I can just share that ingredients on the screen while you speak. Just let me know when.
Sure, that's fine.
Cool.
Okay, so anyway, in this specific gluten-free recipe, we're going to start out by cracking some eggs into the bowl, and we're going to mix up the liquid ingredients first. So we've got 3 eggs. We've got a couple of tablespoons of water, and then some oil. Traditionally, people use chicken fat as the fat in their matzo balls, and if you've got that, that's great. You can use butter. I am using olive oil, and we're going to put in 4 tablespoons, which is also a 1/4 cup. And this will give the matzo balls a little bit of richness. And then I'm just going to stir up the liquid ingredients. And then also to give them some flavor, because clearly matzo meal is pretty bland, you can put in some chopped herbs and really whatever herb you like. I'm going to use some chopped parsley. Dill is a really nice addition to chicken soup and matzo balls. You could use chopped chives. Whatever you've got and whatever your favorite fresh herb is would be great. And then once you've got the liquid ingredients mixed up, you can throw in your dry. And so in this small bowl, I've got a 1/4 cup of potato starch, which is also going to help those matzo balls hold together. With the gluten-free issue, this is really going to help. Some salt, and you'll see that on the recipe. I believe it's a 1/2 teaspoon, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 2 teaspoons of kosher salt, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and then xanthan gum, which is also something that's super common in gluten-free baking and gluten-free ingredients. It's another one of those things that helps baked items and things with flour hold together a little bit better. So if you're gluten-free, you've maybe heard of that. If not, you don't need it if you cook with regular wheat flour, but those of us who are gluten-free definitely get a lot of benefit from that. So I'm just mixing up all of the dry ingredients, and then those go right into the liquid, and we're just going to mix that up until it's well combined. And so with any matzo ball recipe, you want to let this dough, or this batter, refrigerate overnight. And the reason is that the matzo meal is kind of the consistency of breadcrumbs. And those larger crumbs don't really absorb the liquid right away. So when you put it in the refrigerator, it allows all of that matzo meal to get completely hydrated with the liquid. and makes it easier to really form it. So this would go in the refrigerator overnight. And then I have some that I already refrigerated last night, and I'm going to show you how to form them. So it seems like it would be a pretty easy process making a matzo ball. It's a lot like making a meatball, but I think one of the mistakes that people make is they take the little bit and they start rolling and rolling and rolling, and they're trying to make it perfectly round. And what happens when you do that is that they get really dense. And even when you cook them and they absorb some of the water, they stay a little bit dense. And if you've had matzo balls before, it's nice when they're light and they're fluffy. So we're not going to get too carried away with getting them super perfectly round. The other thing is to make them small. This seems like a really small piece, but when it cooks, it's going to absorb a lot of water and they puff up. And I personally like my matzo balls a little bit smaller. This is going to get big. So I'm going to start with a very small piece, maybe about the size of a walnut. And I'm going to cup both of my hands this way. And I'm going to gently touch the top and the bottom and roll gently, just enough until it looks kind of round. And then I'm going to keep going. And on the stove, I've got a pot of boiling water, which is how we're going to cook these matzo balls. And the one thing that you also want to remember is that these matzo balls, they're already salted from the ingredients that we put into them, but they're going to be absorbing a lot of water. And as they absorb that water, the flavor and the salt is going to get very diluted. So it's really important that you add salt to that water so that when the matzo balls absorb it, they also absorb some of that flavor and they don't get bland once they're fully cooked. So I've got a few here that I'm going to throw in. And these actually cook for a pretty long time. Most matzo balls, years ago when I ever made matzo balls with regular matzo meal, non-gluten-free, they cooked for about 15 minutes, if I remember correctly. These cook for 35 to 40 minutes, and they really do take that long. So while we're doing our other recipes, those will be cooking, and we'll kind of keep an eye on them. So I'm just going to put 5 into my pot here, and we'll let those cook. Okay, Google, set a timer for 40 minutes. You gotta love Google. Starting now. My best assistant in the kitchen. All right, so I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm gonna go to my soup, which has again gotten quite a bit of sediment on the top that needs to be scraped. So I'll do one more scraping for you guys, just to see this foamy stuff that has floated to the top. We're going to scrape that all out. And then once I'm done with that, I can then throw in the onion, celery, carrot, and all the herbs that I've prepared. Get the flame way down so that all it does is simmer. And if you can wait as long as 7 hours to let your soup simmer, you're going to be amazed at how rich and delicious it is. So if you can, especially with so many people being home for such a long time these days, you might have the time to do that. All right, so I'm going to put this back on the stove over a super low flame. And, and we'll get started on our next recipe, which is haroset. So for anybody who's been to a Seder before, who celebrates Passover on a regular basis, you might have heard of something called haroset. It represents the mortar that was used to build the temple. And I grew up with a grandmother that came from Syria, and so her cooking was all very Middle Eastern. Some of you who are maybe Ashkenazi Jewish grew up with a completely different type of haroset that's made with apples. So from the Middle Eastern side, It's made with dates, and it is one of my favorite things my grandmother ever made, and I think you're going to love it too. So it's made with dates. You're going to start with about a pound of dates. I'm doing a half a recipe, but I'll tell you the correct proportions. So dates are extremely sweet. So you want to balance your flavors all the time. If you've got something that's super, super sweet, you want to balance it maybe with something kind of salty, something kind of sour. This is what makes things that you cook taste good, is when they have more than one flavor. Your taste bud tastes salty, sweet, sour, bitter. And if you can include at least 2 of those, even 3, your food is going to be delicious. So we are going to add some wine, which is going to add a little bit of tang to it. We're going to do a 1/4 cup of red wine. Excuse the box. I was just trying to get a small amount of wine. I'm not much of a wine drinker. My grandmother used the Manischewitz Sweet Concord grape wine. I prefer something a little less sweet because the dates are already so sweet. We're going to add, sorry, I disappeared there for a second. So another thing to add some tang and some acid would be an orange and just some depth of flavor besides the sweetness of the dates. So one way to get orange flavor is not just from the juice, but also from the zest. And that's the very outer layer of the peel. And you get that by using something called a microplane. It's just a really super fine grater. And you're going to just gently run the orange up and down that microplane. And you can see on the spots where I've already run the microplane that I have not gone all the way down to the white part of the peel. That part's pretty bitter. And if you want just pure orange flavor, I just take the orange, I run it 2 times in one spot, and then I rotate it. 2 times in one spot, and then keep rotating so that I don't go all the way down to the deep pit. And then you can do the entire orange if you like. And then we're also going to use the juice from the orange. So I'll just cut it in half through the equator. I'm going to squeeze in. You can do the entire orange. You can do half the orange. And so we're balancing out the flavors. A little bit of acid along with the sweet is really going to help. And so you take this, you put it on the stove over a high flame, and we're just going to heat up the dates and all that liquid enough so that the dates get soft and they fall apart. So I'm going to take this wooden cooking spatula, and I'm just going to kind of break up the dates so that you can even chop them a little bit before if you want, but they eventually get so soft that they end up falling apart. And then we're just going to throw it into the food processor. You can also use an immersion blender if you've got one instead of the food processor to turn this into a paste. And it's quite delicious. In addition to using this as rosette, I think the flavor is so amazing that I've tried it in a lot of other different things. I put it, sometimes a little bowl of it, on my cheese platter, and it is amazing with something like brie. I also make these little tarts, little mini tarts in a little shell that I bake with a little bit of this rosette, and then some other kind of cheese. That the sweet of the dates and the tang of the cheese is quite amazing together. So you can find other ways. Sometimes just spread a little bit on a piece of matzah with some butter. It's amazing. So let's take a look at our matzah balls. They've only been going for about 7 minutes, but you'll already see that they are starting to puff up quite a bit. And you might think that they look cooked, but on the inside, they're still quite raw. And so don't be tempted to take it off a little bit too early with these gluten-free ones. They do take quite a while. So I suggest going just with the time that it takes on the recipe. All right. So next up, I'm going to throw in all of my flavor ingredients into the soup, the carrots, the celery, the herbs, the onion, and then I'm going to turn the flame all the way down so all I've got is a tiny simmer. All right, so let's move on to dessert. And Manny, how are we doing on time?
You just say dessert, so take your time. That's our best, most favorite part of the show.
Okay. All right. So, a lot of you are at home with kids. Passover is a celebration, and I always like, you could bake a cake or you could buy some cookies, but I like to do something that gets people kind of involved in making their own creation themselves. This is really easy. It doesn't require any baking skills, but I am going to teach you how to make something called ganache. This is a kind of a chocolate glaze that can be poured over cake and it kind of sets, but it's awesome also for dipping. And so we're going to do a couple of different versions of that and one other sauce, and it's going to give you kind of a little dessert bar where people can make their own creations, which I think is really what makes a celebration more fun when everybody's involved. So let's start with flavor. So I've combined chocolate with two different ingredients that are going to kind of complement it. So chocolate, what are the flavors in chocolate? Chocolate is sweet, but it's also bitter. And that's why we love it so much, because those two flavors, the sweet balanced by the bitter and vice versa, is what makes our taste buds go, oh my God, that's amazing. And so we're going to do that even further with adding some flavors to the chocolate that are also going to give it that balance and depth of flavor. So I'm just going to give you a peek at the haroset. So you can see that, if you can, hopefully, that the dates have softened up quite a bit. And unfortunately, I forgot to take I realized that these are not pitted dates. So be sure that you're not like me, and you remember to pull the pits out of the dates before you put them in the pan. But I'm just mushing this up a little bit. And once those dates seem like they've completely fallen apart, is when you can take it and either use your immersion blender, which is just a handheld blender, to turn it into a puree. You can throw it in your food processor or in the blender. Any one of those devices will work. Now, the traditional Ashkenazi haroset that's made with apples is usually chunky. And some people like their haroset chunky. So you could actually just kind of mush it up with your spoon and leave it so that it's a bit chunky. Whatever your preference is. I enjoy the puree best, but really, cooking is all about cooking something that you enjoy. So however you enjoy it, that works. But you can see already that it's kind of turned into a paste. It looks kind of messy. It doesn't look very beautiful, but oh my God, it's delicious. So I'm going to grab a glove here and I'm going to pull out some of the pits. And we're going to put two other flavors in this, one other flavor in it to balance it out. I'm going to throw in just a little bit of cinnamon, and that gives it, also balances the sweet just by giving it that little bit of bite, that little bit of kick, gentle kick that you get from cinnamon. And then we'll add some nuts to it as well. Traditionally, the nut of choice was pine nuts. That's what my grandmother used, but pine nuts these days are quite expensive. And so walnuts make a great substitution. So just put in some chopped walnuts. You can leave them out if you like. This is delicious without nuts if you're nut free. All right, so I think I've gotten most of my pits out. I'm just gonna put in some cinnamon. And the heat of the mixture is gonna cook that cinnamon a little bit, so you never wanna use raw spices. And then however much chopped nuts you want, you can use about a half a cup of nuts in the ingredient, in the recipe, but if you like a lot of nuts, if you just like a little, you don't like any at all, that's really your choice. And if you can afford pine nuts, fantastic. If not, walnuts. If you want an really inexpensive substitution, sunflower seeds are give you kind of the nice same texture, but they're a lot less expensive than nuts. And so already, this has pretty much turned itself into a paste. And it's really pretty ready to go. If you like it smoother, put it in your blender, like I said, or your food processor. But it's not the most beautiful thing, but it is my favorite thing on the Passover table. And I think you'll enjoy it too. All right. So dessert, let's move on. So I was talking about chocolate and combining it to just give it more depth of flavor, to complement the bitter and the sweet that's in chocolate. So we're going to start out by making a ganache that's flavored with chocolate and coffee. So coffee is also a bitter ingredient. It's bitter in a different way than chocolate. It's not as sweet, but if you've ever had mocha, you know how wonderful that can be. So we're gonna complement that with just about a teaspoon of instant coffee. If you don't have instant coffee, but you really like the idea of putting coffee in with your chocolate, you can just brew some coffee and use the liquid coffee as your liquid in this with maybe just a hair of coconut milk. Or you can even put maybe just half water with the coffee, just use half the water and use the rest of the liquid that's required for the recipe as coconut milk. So I'm going to put in 1/3 of a cup of coconut milk. And so I'm using the canned coconut milk. It has a little bit more flavor. It's a little bit richer. You can also use cream. I personally am dairy free. And so ganache is traditionally made with cream. I use coconut because it is high fat, coconut milk because it's high fat. And it's creamy and it's got a delicious taste. So cream or coconut cream is fine. We're going to use 1/3 of a cup. And the easiest way to do this is to just put it in the microwave for 30 seconds. I love this because, you know, a lot of recipes you'll see for ganache will tell you to put this in a double boiler. I am always looking for ways to do less dishes, and I guess you probably are too. So if you just put this in the bowl that you're going to serve it in, microwave safe, then you have saved yourself washing a pot. So I'm just going to throw this in the microwave for 30 seconds. And then we'll move on, while that's going, we'll move on to our second one, which is Sorry. I can't remember which one I offered you, so I'm just going to be sure I do the right one. Oh, and so the next one is super fun for kids because it's peanut butter and chocolate. And who doesn't love peanut butter and chocolate? So peanut butter is going to give you a lot of richness. It's going to give you a little bit of a salty element to it. And again, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, we combine those flavors and our tongue goes, oh my God, that's amazing. So, some peanut butter. And then again, you can use heavy cream. I'm going to again use canned coconut milk. So once your chocolate and coconut milk goes through the microwave for 30 seconds, you're just going to pull it out and you're going to stir it best with some sort of whisk. This will help break up the chocolate. And by the way, I'm using chocolate chips here. You can use chunks of chocolate. You can use, chocolate chunks, chocolate bars. You'll if it's a bar, you'll want to break it up or cut it up into smaller pieces. And so this wire whisk is just helping to break up all the chocolate. And the heat that is left in it, you don't have to worry that it comes out of the microwave completely melted. The heat that's remaining is gonna get it all melted. So you'll just keep stirring until it's smooth. And you'll want to do this a little bit ahead of time so that it has some time to cool. And once you dip your matzah in it, it immediately starts to set just a little bit. And I'll show you why this is incredibly fun. So we'll just set this one aside. This is our coffee flavored chocolate ganache. And so we've got our peanut butter one here. So I've got chocolate chips, I've got peanut butter, and now I'm going to add 1/3 of a cup of liquid again. And this one will also go into the microwave for 30 seconds. And you can see how quick and easy this is for you to prepare, but the fun that it provides is amazing. So here we're going to do 1/3 sauce for everybody. And this one is just a plain marshmallow sauce. It's really fun to combine marshmallow and chocolate. So this is going to be plain marshmallow. People can dip into both or pour it on. And so this is about 3 cups of mini marshmallows, or you can use 18 full-size marshmallows, whatever you can find in the market. Things are super hard to find these days. So again, 1/3 of a cup into the marshmallows. And so now here is our peanut butter one. And again, it doesn't look completely melted, but the heat that we've created in the microwave is enough that it's going to melt all of the chocolate that's in there. I'm gonna grab a wire whisk. And you can see as I keep stirring, the chocolate is melting, it's combining, and it smells amazing. Another thing that you can add to this one, and even to the coffee one, is cinnamon. Cinnamon is really a flavor enhancer. It has its own flavor, but also it's almost like pepper. It's almost like the dessert version of pepper, in that it wakes up your taste buds. So anything you put on those taste buds is going to be enhanced. So again, that's an option. If you like cinnamon, your family likes cinnamon with peanut butter and chocolate, amazing. All right, so the last one, the marshmallows. We're going to add a little bit of vanilla to this one. I could have put some vanilla in those as well. We're going to do about a teaspoon, which I'm just going to, a half a teaspoon, which I'm going to eyeball. And I can even at this point, because this is a liquid, I can throw in the vanilla into these two and stir it right in. Vanilla is also, especially with the alcohol in vanilla extract, is quite a good flavor enhancer in baking. All right, so into the microwave for 30 seconds. And so while all that is going, you're going to have to excuse me 1 minute. While that's going, you can grab your box of matzah and break up the matzah into pieces so that people can use it for dipping. So you can decide what size you want it to be, something that's kind of long enough that you can have a handle and then you can dip it in into whatever you want to dip it into. I make them kind of long and thin. It's about 6 or 8 pieces for each large matzah cracker. And again, I've got gluten-free matzah here. I prefer the egg matzah. And so you can also include in your matzah bar is maybe some rainbow sprinkles, chocolate sprinkles if you have them, some mini chocolate chips, some whole marshmallows, and then you are able to dip your matzah into this ganache, and it's super thick so that it doesn't drip off of your matzah. And then you can spoon on whatever you enjoy. And this is super fun for the kids. It's fun for adults. And this is my favorite way to do dessert, especially since there's no oven involved and stress about the proper proportions in baking, which honestly, even though I'm a chef, I'm more of a savory chef, and honestly, baking intimidates me. So I think this is the most fun way to do dessert. All right, so let's take a look at the marshmallows. So these might take a little bit longer in the microwave. I think this didn't quite go long enough. So, you know, with chocolate, you want to be super careful. Chocolate can burn pretty easily. And when it burns, it's kind of disastrous. So again, when you're heating up your chocolate chips, 30 seconds is a good place to start. Everybody's microwave is a little bit different. So if it needs a little bit longer, I would go with maybe 10 seconds at a time. And then keep stirring and see how it goes. If you feel like there's just a few chunks left in that chocolate and you've been stirring and you want it super smooth, 5 or 10 seconds, and that's it, no burning. Marshmallows are a lot more forgiving. They're just sugar and corn syrup, so I'm going to stick these in for longer. All right. So we're going to take a look at the matzo balls. They've been going for quite a long time. And again, when I first started making gluten-free matzo balls, I thought, wow, that's kind of a long time. I'm tempted to take them out sooner. And I would take one out of the pot and break it in half and see that the inside was still raw. So I'm going to kind of do a little demo for you so you can actually see that. So you can see that it has puffed up quite a bit. It looks on the outside like it might be cooked, but we've been going for about 28, 29 minutes. So I'm just going to cut it in half, and I'm going to get it up real close. And if you see in the middle, you can see the outside looks pretty almost white. The inside still looks fairly yellow. It looks more like the color of the dough when it was raw. So you can see that we really do need to just be patient and keep going. So I'll set this aside. And we've got melted marshmallows looking much better. You can see that they look like they're just going to fall apart. So we just give it a stir. And marshmallows are also really just a very bland, sweet base. So we add a little bit of vanilla. There's other flavors you could add to marshmallow. You could add cinnamon. You could add even a little bit of chocolate, of cocoa powder, something to just wake it up, even coffee. But this is kind of a dip on that bar, and people might want to top it with some chocolate some chocolate chips or sprinkles, and that will give it that beautiful depth of flavor so that we can balance everything that we're cooking. All right, so I'm going to stop right here and see if any questions have come up. And Manny, do you want to open this up to any questions?
One second, Chef. I'm checking to see if we have any questions over here. Nothing on the app, and I don't see anything on the live session. I shared your recipes, so whoever's watching, you have the links to the recipes. So I think we're good for now. Looks delicious.
Okay. Yeah, and so what I've included on those sheets that I sent you is basically just the ingredients. But if you want the method for any of those, people can email me. They can direct message me on Instagram, Chef Janet K. I just wanted to provide the ingredients so you could kind of follow along and just get an idea of how the technique works.
That's great. By the way, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
So email is chefjanetka@gmail.com, or just through Instagram at Chef Janet K, and that's just the letter K at the end.
Okay, and I'm gonna share those as well on both platforms, so people can have that as well. Thank you for sharing, Chef. Okay, so if you're watching on Facebook Live, I just put the information out to contact Chef Janet directly as well.
Yeah, and
Next,
also I'm sorry, I'm also on Facebook at Chef Janet K as well.
Perfect. Okay. Great. So I don't see any questions yet, but people are thumbs up, right and left on the recipes, and a lot of gluten-free fans are watching you too. So thank you for sharing.
Good. I'm glad I could oblige.
Yeah, well, at least you're gonna enjoy the recipes over there and what you cooked.
Yes. Unfortunately, I didn't have any kids over to help me eat all the dessert, but these actually, as a aside, these ganaches, they don't do well in the refrigerator for very long, but you can put it in the freezer. If you've got a lot left over, just throw it in the freezer and then put it in the microwave to defrost it.
Okay, that's a great tip. And you're off to celebrate Passover with your family right now, virtually?
Yes, virtually they're all on the East Coast. So I think at 3:30 I go on Zoom and celebrate with my family. So I've already got some things I can
Right.
let them feast their eyes on.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Chef Giant, I can't thank you enough sharing your time, your recipes, your cooking secrets with us, and I wish you and the family happy, healthy Passover. And once again, thank you for your time.
Okay, and thank you all so much for joining. Please, if you ever have any questions about what I've gone over today or just advice on gluten-free cooking, even regular cooking, that's how I'm trained. I'm happy to help you with whatever you need. And I appreciate you joining me on Passover and helping me to brighten up my day.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes both ways. And let's set up a session next month for something different as well, so we can have some fun.
That sounds fantastic. I'd love to.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks
Okay.
everybody who's
Well, thank
watching,
you.
and yeah, be safe. Happy holidays, happy Passover, happy Easter. Be well. See you soon. Bye, Chef. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
bye-bye.
The broadcast of Facebook
Good
Live
job.
has